Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Jane and today I'm going to be talking about why sometimes we label ourselves as not creative or not able to draw. Now, I run an online creative community and it's called The Studio, and often when people join this conversation where they say, oh, I don't know whether I'm in the right place because I'm not creative and I can't draw. And I know exactly where they are coming from because when I was at primary school, I was regarded as not good at art, not good at drawing. And as soon as I got to secondary school, I wasn't allowed to take art at all because it was felt to be a waste of time because I was so bad at it. And I didn't pick up a pencil from that point. So I would have been, 12, 13, until, and this is going to sound ridiculous, I was 45. And all of that time, I would have said, I can't draw. But when I was 30, I went on a trip to Australia, and there at a kind of a craft market in Sydney, I saw somebody who was doing freehand machine embroidery. So drawing with a sewing machine. It was the first time I had seen it and I was just blown away by the technique. And I wanted to try it out. So I came home and I worked out how to do freehand machine embroidery and made a business out of it. But still, because the label, I cannot draw, was so strong in my head, I would still say I cannot draw, even though quite clearly I was making a living drawing, albeit with a sewing machine. And it wasn't until 2015, 2016 that I thought, hang on, this is a bit peculiar. You know, I'm spending all of these hours per day drawing with my sewing machine and I'm still saying I can't draw and I haven't actually tried. So I picked up a pencil and just started, copying things, making motifs, designing with it. And I found, yes, I could draw. Why had I labelled myself like that? And why had I restricted myself so much with this? And of course, the reason is, well, one, that you're told things as a child and you take them very, very deep down into yourself, and it takes a lot of kind of like booting them out to move past them. But secondly, I think it was because I was making lots of assumptions about creative people, about artists. So I was dividing the world into artists and non-artists. And I saw artists as producing completely original work out of the blue with no aids, no sort of pre-workings, nothing. It was just as though it was some kind of miracle out there, amazing, wonderful, finished. And I saw me as just working away, producing really wonky stuff that never quite worked the way that I wanted to. And I thought this was two different things. But recently, I've been noticing more and more that this just simply isn't true. It was really brought home to me when I visited the exhibition of rag rugs designed by Winifred Nicholson, which is in Carlisle, earlier in the year, well, beginning of last year. And I was amazed that in that exhibition, there were rag rugs which she had copied the design exactly from postcards that she had been sent. And I thought, oh, that doesn't chime with my preconceptions. It doesn't chime with what I am believing and sort of putting myself down. Now you can see there's a whole video about the Winifred Nicholson exhibition. So there was that. And then this year, as I've begun to look at Elizabethan embroidery, which is for a project that we're doing in the studio, time and again, I've realized that a lot of the amazing embroideries were, elements were copied, things were drawn by other people. There was a whole load of kind of pre-work went on. It wasn't just one person saying, okay, I'm going to embroider a waistcoat, and it just coming out like that as they worked. And yet that was the way that I was expecting myself to work if I wanted to give myself titles of creative or good at drawing. So over the past month or so, I have been looking at a very particular piece of work, which is in the V&A. I haven't seen it in real life. I am crossing my fingers that I get to see it in March when I'm down in London. But it is kind of a coverlet. It's about 8 foot long, but it's quite narrow. And it's linen, and it is embroidered with scrolling flowers and leaves, and also lots of animals. It was probably embroidered around about 1610, 1620, and its original use is likely to have been to go over a big wooden box, because early Tudor times, up until sort of Elizabeth, every single surface was decorated. So you'd have layers and layers of decorative textiles. And this is probably what it was. When you look at the piece carefully, there are two things that are very noticeable. One is that it is unfinished, and that you can see the lines that have been inked in for the scrolls. So it is an unfinished piece. I'm always so fond of unfinished pieces, and this one, they have done so much extremely expensive work, because a lot of it is in silver and gold thread, and yet it's not been quite finished off. Maybe they went on to another project, maybe something happened, maybe they no longer needed this coverlet. And they were wild times. The second thing that I noticed is that the animals, there are several of each animal. So several horses, several lions, several porcupines, of the leaping hare. And they are all very similar, but slightly different. And my suspicion is that either somebody was drawing them, copying them from an emblem book, like a book of woodcuts that would be specifically produced as patterns for embroidery, or they have been transferred with pricking and pouncing. And each of them is it's a very simple technique for transferring. What you do is you get your woodcut, and then you prick very carefully along all of the lines, which kind of like makes it perforated, I suppose, all the perforated lines. And then you used either charcoal or pounce, which was dried cuttlefish ink, and you would put that very carefully along the lines. Then the lines would come through onto your fabric, and before they blew away, you would carefully join them up with ink. But doing that, and doing it repeatedly, would give you just things that are slightly different. And then by the time you've drawn in the ink and then embroidered on the top, they'll be just a little bit twistier, a slightly different size, 1 foot higher than the other, that kind of thing. So this amazing coverlet was sort of the inspiration for me exploring these motifs and how easy they would be to put up in the studio. And we're making a bag. We're making kind of an embroidered linen bag. We've done the straps, and we've done the felted beads for it, and we've printed some fabric which might go inside, and now we're looking at how we embroider it. So I'm wanting to give two or three options for the style of embroidery. And I thought, well, these animals are so endearing, so winsome, it would be good to do them. So I've started off just doing samples myself onto little bits of linen, which I made up as Christmas presents, because, you know, waste not, want not. And what I did was put the image up on my computer, my laptop, and then with a pen, draw freehand onto my linen. Now that sounds very scary, but I used a Frixion pen, which is a pen which is heat. It would disappear if you ironed it, so it's not actually that scary. And I was prepared to embrace the wonkiness, because the wonkiness I could see was the soul and the life of these embroideries. And the wonkiness is what kind of connected me back to whoever sat and embroidered those original animals. So I started off with really very wonky drawings on my linen, and then I gradually just filled them in very simple stitches, nothing fancy. I'm not doing gold work or silver work because I don't know how to do it. So all of my embroidery was done in silk wool thread, which was dyed with plants from the garden here. And that gives me, you know, to me, that is incredibly precious. But it also gives a kind of a connection back, because all of the materials that would have been used in Tudor times would have been dyed with plants or possibly animals. So there we are. And as I embroidered it, I did get this feeling of connection that I don't think I would have got if I had been trying to do something perfect or something original even. It was to do with the copying of these animals, because these animals and their slightly mad looks are really of their time. Obviously, animals have a great symbolic and heraldic meaning, you know, and that was really important in these times. But also, this was the time where monarchs and really rich people were beginning to put together private zoos with poor, sad tigers, porcupines, peacocks, elephants, brought over and installed in palace zoos. James the 1st and 6th, he was one of the keenest collectors of animals, and he even made like this special feeding thing for lion cubs, with very much like a bottle now, but it was before bottles were around for babies, and it was like a multi-teat thing for feeding his lion cubs, and he personally designed that. So we also have this kind of, these animals, they're a status thing, and probably people hadn't seen them, and they were just in these woodcut books or sheets of woodcuts that you could buy to do your embroideries. And hardly any of them have survived because they were used, you know, and they were perforated and they were pounded with charcoal, and then eventually they were thrown out. So although we have some copies of the bound ones, the actual pieces that the people used over and over again have gone. So what has this taught me? What did my little animal lavender sachets teach me? Well, they taught me that creativity, drawing, artistry is not at all what I thought it was. That it can be a connection and purlining and tracing, and because this is the other thing, there were also people who would provide you as a domestic embroiderer. This is like back in 1600s, with a piece of linen that they, as a professional artist, had drawn it on, like early embroidery kits. So there are also those. But it has made me let go of this idea that to be creative, I need to have completely new ideas, not based on anything else, not helped along by anybody else's drawings, not existing motifs. And it has made me realize that that is as much rubbish as my belief that I cannot draw. So what I'd say is that if you also have this feeling that you can't draw and that you therefore can't be creative, have a go at just copying something. You can trace it. You could, there's now lots and lots of ways of transferring images onto fabric. You don't have to be there with your pricking and pounding it with charcoal. Because I remember when I was, I did a City and Guilds, first year City and Guilds embroidery when I was 17, and a kind of like a gap year. And we did that, and my goodness, it was difficult and it was messy. There are much easier methods now. Frixion pens, transfer paper. You can get paper to put through a printer that you can then iron on. All kinds of ways. And start like that. Take somebody else's original designs. Maybe look back to Elizabethan embroideries, or cup and ring marks, which is another favourite of mine, or 19th century smocks. I think look around your home. There may be a piece of china that you can that means something to you, that you can take that motif and sketch it out and use that as the beginning of something that you create yourself. Because I would bet you an awful lot that even if you have a voice in your head that says, I can't draw, I'm not creative, you absolutely are. You are creative, so go out and create. And until next Friday, I'm going to say bye-bye. Happy creating.